afternoon. I'm Colleen Ryan. I'm the Consulting Executive Director for the New York State CDFI Coalition. For more than 2 decades, this nonprofit association has been the organizer and catalyst for important initiatives that help CDFIs in the communities they serve. The 2020 CDFI Friday series of webinars and panel discussions was supposed to be our 11th annual statewide conference with the theme New York State CDFIs Collaborating for Impact. But even though we can't gather in person, it is my great pleasure to welcome you today to this online gathering. Allow me to take a moment to thank the Board of Directors of the New York State CDFI Coalition, especially the coordinator of this panel, Kim Jacobs. I'm grateful for her help. I'd also like to thank our sponsors for their understanding as we made the move from real to virtual conference. We're grateful to JP Morgan Chase, Wells Fargo, M&T Bank, Amalgamated Bank, Capital One, B&B, Citizens Bank, Community Preservation Corporation, Hanover Bank, Ponce Bank, TD Bank, Valley, and Wood Forest National Bank for their support. So today, and for a few Fridays to come, we'll gather online with supporters from around the state to share ideas, learn about the latest lending and program innovation, enjoy the company of people with a shared passion. We have a couple of options for Q&A at the end of the panel and also during. You can either use the chat feature built into Zoom, or if it's easier for you, just send your question to info@nyscdfi.org. Please feel free to send questions throughout the talk, and I and Dan will do our best to get as many as we can. If you're not already a member, please consider joining your colleagues from around the state and help the coalition develop its agenda for 2021. With a track record of some 4 decades of providing capital to low-income communities, New York State CDFIs have a legacy of success to draw upon. And as the need for our services becomes more evident than ever, we're looking forward to working with you to keep up with the expectations of our clients and the needs of the underserved. We are so delighted to welcome our panelists to discuss cybersecurity for CDFIs. Before we find out more about the tips and tactics organizations can immediately deploy to keep their data safe, I'll ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves, starting with our moderator, Dan Delahanty.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Dan Delahanty. I'm the Director of Community Development with B&B Bank, a community bank based in Long Island with a presence in New York City.
And Dr. Kisekka.
Hello, everyone. I'm Victoria Kisekka. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Albany in the area of cybersecurity and digital forensics.
And Debra.
Good morning. My name is Debra Leone. I am a partner at Mountain View Advisors, which is a financial institution consulting company.
And Edison.
Good morning, everybody. Edison Ortega with Spring Bank, Chief Information Security Officer.
So I am going to go away and leave it to our illustrious panel to talk about cybersecurity. Thanks very much.
Great. Good morning, everyone. I'm really happy we have a terrific group of experts here. I am not an expert in cybersecurity, so my job is to just set a little bit of context, have the panelists share some really relevant and timely information to help you folks with your job and to move the conversation along. I know it's been a long week for a lot of us or everyone, so this is either a really welcome diversion or maybe not. But anyway, with that out of the way, I just wanted to engage the folks who are on the phone. I don't know how this will work or not, but if everyone can find the raise hand button. How many of you who are participating would say that you have a good grasp of cybersecurity? Raise your hand.
Well, there's one.
There's one. Okay. How many of you, and again, this is all anonymous, think you should know, really think you should know more about it, but don't know very much about it? Anything?
I think that's where most people are going to fall.
Okay, and then how many of you would deem yourself to be an expert and you could be up here presenting?
And the hands are falling.
Okay, all right. So that attempt at icebreaker was a little odd, but hey, we're gonna move on. But hey, I work in community development, but I sit within the wider enterprise risk group at B&B Bank. So I've really grown to appreciate and understand where various elements of a bank or of a lending institution or any institution falls within a wider risk framework. So we're going to speak of that a little bit today, but I wanted to just level set here and give you my bank's definition of what cybersecurity is. And I'll just read from it. It's the art, and again, the art, not a science, the art of protecting networks, devices, and data from unauthorized access or criminal use, and the practice of ensuring confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information. So there's a lot there, and we're gonna unpack that information through our panelists and what they're gonna be speaking about. They're gonna shape their comments and discussion about what folks in an institution can do at the enterprise level to have a strong cybersecurity program, what they can do at the individual level for a cybersecurity program, and we're also going to talk about, of course, worst case scenarios. All right? But to give you a little bit of context before I turn it over to the panelists, even before the pandemic, more and more business activities were going virtual. From data storage in the cloud and remote working to online transactions, our increasingly digital world offers opportunity, but also security threats. With hackers becoming bolder and cyber attacks getting bigger and more frequent every year, business owners must take control of their computer security and protect themselves. For too long, an imaginary line has separated cybersecurity from, quote unquote, the business. Most board members and senior executives have a limited understanding of their information technology platforms and systems. And whether in-house or outsourced, many cybersecurity team leaders approach security as a challenge only defined by technology and regulation. Now, after years of throwing money at the issue with less than satisfactory results, we must consider what we've been asking the wrong questions and taking the wrong approach. So with that context, I hope that helps. I've been in banking now for about 14 years and have really grown to appreciate what cybersecurity is. Before that, I worked at quite a few different CDFIs, and this was, pre the quote unquote modern world, but I was always stunned and literally quite terrified with how much information we had on our customers and clients and what we were doing or not doing to protect that. So that's always been the risk. That's what, as a number two at a couple of organizations, that was some of the stuff that kept me up at night. So I'm gonna stop talking and introduce the discussion. For our panelists, can you speak to what at the individual level institutions can do to create, bolster, improve a cybersecurity program? Why don't we start with Edison?
Sure. Thank you. Well, first, welcome everybody. Cybersecurity is always, especially now, a critical topic for everybody, all organizations, individual level. And I would like to focus on one item here out of what was handed out as the flyer, and that's public Wi-Fi on the individual level. So this on a personal level, on a corporate level, we should not use public Wi-Fi. On a corporate level, make sure that all your employees are using a VPN solution that automatically starts off when they turn on their mobile device. It's really important that we keep the information secure, and the only way to keep it secure is that if we keep it within our environment. With the pandemic, we have to rely on technology, on people working remotely. So work with your team, work with senior management to ensure that all the devices that are connecting to your environment are secure and that they're not connecting to a public Wi-Fi. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to expand on that or any other information.
Great. Why don't we go to Debra now? We're just going to move along in terms of the line I see here.
I took a little different approach to this question. Having worked with some CDFIs, I saw myself as the nexus between Edison and the rest of the organization, because there's a very big fear level in the individual worker and manager areas about dealing with cybersecurity. The IT department, they get it. They're on top of it, and they know how to manage. It's the individual level has so many different meanings, from who is in charge of the cybersecurity plan at your organization. That's an individual. That's a CISO that you have to designate. There have to be individuals involved in the planning for a breach. There's team leaders and participants. Everybody needs to know what to do when there is a breach. And I found that there's a disconnect between the IT area, who really generally has it covered, whether you're in-house or outsourced, and then sort of democratizing it through the rest of the organization. And so that's where you come into, and this sort of is going to mix into the enterprise, the policies, the procedures, the phishing exercises, the breach planning. And so that becomes, if you do not have those documents in place, the individual in your organizations won't know what to do and when to do it. So my first suggestion in sort of pulling this into the mainstream of your organization is plan and prepare, and then be ready, and then be ready to assess after a breach. So you have, 4 very distinct areas: the plan, the preparation. The planning would be your policies and procedures. The preparation is the training. If you're talking about individuals, you need to have a training plan. So it's a lot more than don't click on the email that comes in that you might find suspicious. It's how does the individual in the organization even know what a suspicious email looks like? And of course, to Edison's point, with everybody working at home, people are going to, use public Wi-Fi. They're going to do it. And so how does your company ward against that is definitely a very big consideration now that there's a lot of people working outside of the office.
Terrific, terrific. Victoria, can you continue the, your tips and tactics at the individual level for organizations?
Yes, certainly. So an organization has to make a clear distinction between the different types of users. So like Debra was talking about, if you have users in the IT department, this could be users that know what they're supposed to do, whereas an end user in another department may not know what that means. And so having policies is one thing. Training users on how to comply to those policies is another thing. And also, as with training users, creating a risk-aware culture whereby users understand the repercussions for non-compliance, and also explaining to them what non-compliance means and what the possible impact that could be to the organizational resources. And so if a user doesn't know what non-compliance looks like, and they don't even know the consequences of non-compliance, they are less likely to comply, right? And these are things that training can help address.
So just a broad question to the panelists. So, any organization, large or small, you have staff members who are involved in users, as Victoria referenced, that are involved in a variety of things. Some are quite siloed. And then the other thing is awareness, capacity, and skills related to IT and knowledge varies across the company, whether it's generational or whatnot. What tips and advice do you have to create that culture where everybody has to be aware of what their role at the individual level is, in cybersecurity? How do you do that when some people say, well, that's really not my area, so-and-so, she worries about that, so I don't have to worry about it. How do you create that kind of culture of awareness?
Culture starts from the board down. So if your board doesn't understand cybersecurity and the value that a well put together cybersecurity policy, procedure, and plan brings, then it's not going to bleed down into the rest of your organization. If your board is not being trained on cybersecurity, frankly, I don't think you really have a right to demand more from your staff than you do from your board. So cybersecurity has to be taken seriously by everybody. That starts with board training. And obviously the board sets the policy that managers follow. And then to Victoria's point, you need to have a solid training plan. You need to have solid preparation plan, and you need to have a solid response plan. But that all does come from your board of directors. And, the New York State Department of Financial Services expects the organizations on this call to have the very same protocols and procedures as Wells Fargo, Chase, and Bank of America. The data you are storing is the same data they are storing. The breach ramifications are the same. You have people's social security numbers, you have other private bank account numbers, private information, and your obligation is the same as a company that spends billions of dollars on its technology and its cybersecurity. So at a minimum, you can put together the skeleton that they have, which is a good policy, good procedures, good auditing protocols, training. Those things do not escape any organization. You're required to have it. And it's not the thing that I wanted to get across today, the point that I wanted to make, because I'm not a cybersecurity expert like Edison. What I do is I bring cybersecurity down into the organization. That's what the compliance area generally helps to do. And you have to identify the person in your organization who has the capability to do that. You can have a CISO, a cybersecurity officer within your organization. They do not have to be from the IT department, because you need someone who has project management skills and the ability to get the information from the board down into the working level of your organization. And the skill sets are probably more of a project manager and a leader than someone who's very good at technology.
Interesting. Edison, Victoria, do any of you want to build on that?
I can build on that. An interesting point that was mentioned by Debra was regarding compliance. And I think there is a general understanding that compliance would lead to a reduction in risks. It makes sense. However, the question is, how do you motivate people to comply? Supposing I've taken all the necessary training, I understand what I'm supposed to do. It doesn't mean that I have to comply. So for an end user like me, this is where the organization can run into challenges because of lack of user buy-in into the compliance culture. And one of the recommendations that I have is tying that compliance into performance, right? So every organization has performance and promotions that are based upon performance, year-end performance. Why not tie compliance into that? Because it's still a critical component of any organization. And I don't know if Edison has anything to add to that.
No, of course, I think, we're covering multiple facets of cybersecurity. I mean, I think we're covering also some of the enterprise levels already, focusing maybe a little more back on the individual, but regardless, we have to focus on the enterprise level as CDFIs. And what I also find interesting is, we have a vast array of participants at this meeting. Unfortunately, we're not able to see how many people raise their hands or the level of expertise or the level of size. What I always find in most conferences is that a lot of the information provided is information that maybe we already know or that we're already exposed to. So I think on the individual level, I think, training, compliance, performance definitely are all part of it. Fortunately, I think we're at this time, everybody in all our organizations are aware of cybersecurity, maybe not directly on what it means or we're supposed to be within the organization, but we all know that all our information, unfortunately, it has been compromised. With the New York DFS, of course, providing guidelines for the New York State, as painful as that is, I'm sure that we all feel that it's necessary to ensure that not only banks keep their information secure. And from an individual level, I think it's important to not just do training, but allow the communication level. So it's so much of ensuring that employees will let you know if something happens or if they see something that's happening with information instead of holding back with the fear of any retaliation or performance issues. So I think training, communication, ensuring that everybody understands what a phishing email is, using third-party providers. Again, it depends on the size of the organization. Some organizations might have CISO, Chief Information Security Officers, a virtual CISO, which is outsourced to somebody else, or a combination of both. Like Debra mentioned, it doesn't have to be somebody that has experience. If the organization is not able to bring somebody that can act as a Chief Information Security Officer, I will definitely say make sure that the third party that you select is aware of the requirements that fall under the New York DFS, that is aware of what we need to comply for as far as the program, what the board needs to do and approve, what senior management has to put in place, and also the training, like we mentioned, down to the employees. What is the phishing training that is so critical for all of us at the moment as far as our employees? That's really our weakest point right now.
Great. I'm gonna, Edison, you took us to a couple of areas, and I think we're gonna bounce. We're already bouncing between the individual level and the enterprise level. But a really good question came in from Catherine. Can someone, and I don't know, all of you can jump in, but New York State Department of Financial Services, certainly there's Part 500, but can somebody outline what the requirement and the expectations are? The question was, does the state expect CDFIs to have the same security as big banks? I mean, that's the question. Just for a little more context, one of the reasons why I've been interested in this topic is that we all strive to serve small businesses, and small businesses within the DFS structure and requirements have to get their, I hate to say it because everybody's hurting now, and particularly, and it's hard enough anyway, but they have to have a basic awareness and plan for cybersecurity now with the state of New York. So does anyone want to unpack a little bit more what DFS expects of small businesses and specifically CDFIs?
Sure. I'll start. Again, definitely we all have to meet the same requirements, but we all have different type of information. So one of the questions that we had on the flyer is that can we provide let me see what it was here, recommend that, model cybersecurity policy manual. So I think that regardless of the size of the organization, the expertise, there's definitely public information available. You have the NIST cybersecurity standards, right? So, and it goes through, if you're new to the program, what you need to do. So I'll definitely say the person that is responsible in your organization to go there, look at the Part 500 requirement and see what needs to be in place based on the information you have and the access you have and the employees you have. So don't worry about, okay, now I have to spend X amount of money to put all these controls in place. I think that's where it's important, where we come in and say, okay, what is expertise that we have in-house? And that definitely has to be at the board level and senior management level. What expertise we can bring in-house, and then what expertise makes sense for us to outsource. And again, going back to really selecting the right, company to support that based on the level of the organization. And again, Part 500, I'll definitely recommend that, just you Google New York DFS Part 500, it tells you exactly what you need to comply with. And, there's a specific question I'm sure that, we can cover here in the panel. But by now, all of us are supposed to be in compliance with ensuring that, that encryption is in place, that we review our business continuity, that our backups, retention of our information, not only for our customers, but also for our cyber events. part of the requirements, ensuring that we keep in the log information for any, part of the organization for 2 years. To ensure that we comply with those items means that we need to make sure that we have those controls. And unfortunately, I don't think we can go over through all of them at the moment, but that's why I definitely recommend going just to the website, DFS Part 500, looking at each of the guidelines that are there that we need to implement. If you need some assistance in this framework, which is definitely available online, and I'm sure that we will be available if anybody has questions also outside of this panel, but I'm sure Debra and Victoria can definitely expand or and anything I just mentioned.
Well,
Great, and there was, I'm sorry, please go ahead, Debra.
As someone who helps organizations develop their plans and institutionalize them, there's a fear factor. And I think if you take nothing else away from this webinar, please stop being afraid of cybersecurity. It's not going to do your organization any good, and you're going to be sort of throttled by fear. You need to have information security protocols. You need to have an incident response plan. You need to take a look at the data you're storing and categorize it. What data needs to be destroyed? When does it need to be destroyed? You probably in your organization have a very similar thing for the paper that you retain. Well, now you have to do the same exercise for your data. You have to have a business continuity plan. And then of course, as Victoria mentioned, you need to train those employees. And so those are that's the DFS that encompasses the DFS requirement, but it's just the requirement for a cybersecurity plan, DFS or not. There are a lot of resources on the internet that can help somebody walk through this. It is time consuming, but it is necessary. You have to do a risk assessment at the outset. That's the first step you take in the area of cybersecurity. We've developed forms that somebody can go through to walk through the various areas of their organizations to understand where cybersecurity comes into play. And so you begin with the risk assessment, and then you're going to do a data assessment. And from there, you're going to have to develop your business continuity plan. And for sure, you're going to have an incident response plan. Because if you're going to, sitting there and saying nothing's ever going to happen, that's really not a plan. And when something does happen, who speaks for your organization? Who determines what gets released to the public? Who contacts your customers? Those are the elements of a plan. It doesn't mean the plan will ever be put into action, but you need to have the plan in place. And so start with the risk assessment, determine where your exposure is, take a look at the controls you have in place. I don't have to tell CDFIs about risk assessments. Banks and CDFIs do them all the time, but you have to go through those protocols here to satisfy DFS requirements.
Excellent. Victoria, from the academic perspective, I'm sure you deal with entrepreneurs of many levels. How do you speak to how regulations like this impact small businesses, whether they're CDFIs or others? How do you frame this?
So it depends on the organizations, because some regulations are industry specific, but some apply to all organizations as long as you have confidential customer information and employee data that you have to protect. But the first recommendation would be understand your organization and the applicable standards or regulations for that organization. And also guidelines, because there are some that are not standards or regulations. They are not required, but they are recommended. And so to not overlook the recommendations as well, and then see how those fit into your organizational profile. And so as Debra talked about the risk assessment, and I'm not sure if everyone understands how to conduct a risk assessment or what that entails. But at a higher level, you're identifying what your vulnerabilities are and what your threats are. And then you can categorize, but rank them to see which one is the highest probability, has the highest probability of happening or the highest impact. And so then when you're designing your controls, you can align your resources to tackle those mostly highly impactful risks as you go down the, as you go down the list. It could be that you have a risk that may not cause that much havoc on your organization. So perhaps you can save your resources and save the users from training them on something that might not even impact them, versus focusing on what has a high impact and higher likelihood of occurring. But certainly there is value in understanding your organization enough to know what standards would apply and when they would apply.
Excellent, excellent. So I got a cheat sheet from my information security officer at the bank, which I think is going to help propel the conversation forward. But for Part 500 of DFS and for other acts, and I should also mention that states like California and other parts of the country, this is going to become the norm. I'm not a soothsayer, but it's certainly going to become the norm. But what the DFS really requires are some of the things that we've been speaking about. Board involvement, right? Debra set that tone. It needs to come from the board. Penetration testing, as Victoria referenced, where are your weaknesses? And vulnerability scanning, like where are the risks for your information, and knowing and understanding them. Third-party oversight, what vendors do you use? I can't believe how important third-party risk is now in the banking world, and how it makes sense from a consumer perspective. We're on the hook for what our vendors do, so we can't blame it on them. If something goes wrong. So understanding your third-party oversight, and then awareness, training, and monitoring. So if you break it down into those sort of 5 key areas, sort of demystifies it a little bit. But I know we're now getting into sort of the enterprise level. Can someone sort of set the tone for? Now we've talked a lot about what's gone on at the individual level, but more at the enterprise level, to how to think and prioritize and make actionable cybersecurity. Anyone want to start?
I'll definitely, if everybody doesn't mind, I'll jump in. There's one item actually I wanted to bring back, and it relates back to what Debra just finished, where it talks about the incident response. And again, depending on the size of the organization, but we all have cybersecurity insurance. So I think a critical aspect will be contact your cybersecurity insurance policy, find out what will happen in the event of the breach. What are the vendors that are going to be able to help you during that, and tailor your incident response plan to match your cybersecurity plan. They will be able to help you. And again, this definitely depends on the size of the organization, where now you have a full resource that they'll tell you, the law firm that they're going to be able to assign to you, the incident response company that is going to come in and help you do that. And again, following that process, then we can talk about a really small CDFI that can just contact the cybersecurity policy provider, and they will give them all those guidelines so they can feel a little bit more, prepared in the case of an event. And I think, that was just something critical I want to mention from before. And to go into the enterprise level, I think, we already talked about what the board needs to do, the policies that we need to put in place, meet cybersecurity requirements. I think it's critical that, again, we all are aware of cybersecurity. It all started with information security. Now the hot topic is cybersecurity. We just need to keep in mind on what we're doing. Need to make sure we have the controls in place. But I think more than the controls in place, where I was going to go is, don't just meet the requirements. Continue to improve your cybersecurity posture and maturity on an ongoing basis. And I think this should be the goal for all CDFIs. Here's where we are now. Here's our goal for next year. And those could be controls, those could be training, those could be additional staff requirements or third-party requirements. And that would allow to ensure that at least you're not just meeting the requirements when you have, unfortunately, all these bad actors that are going on right now, phishing scams. I'm sure that we're going to discuss some of the other aspects of cybersecurity and the issues that we all face, is ensuring that we have the maturity level. And if we are always just meeting the minimum, we're more likely to fall into one of those cyber criminals. So continue improvement, I'll say, will be the top recommendation I could provide at the moment for each organization.
Great. Deborah or Victoria, do you want to jump in?
I can add a quick comment. Some of the controls, some of the things that we talked about for the user level apply to the enterprise level as well. But I want to quickly mention that to stress the importance of having a security mindset from the top down. And so this would require the organization to even look at their mission statements, because if you bring in a third party to conduct a risk assessment, for example, one of the things that drives some of the things that they do is your mission statement, your principles. What are your guiding principles? And they should change because to reflect changes in new technology and new risks and all of those things. If I know what those are, I can focus on them to make sure that the recommendations that I have map with what your organization thinks is critical for the organization.
Deborah, do you want to jump in?
It's top down. That's Victoria just said it. It starts with the mission statements should be crafted by your board. And it bleeds down from the top. The risk assessment is a critical element. You said something before, Dan, about, this is pervasive, California. Well, New York passed a law recently. I think it's called the SHIELD Act. And it applies to it applies to business.
Exactly.
About employee information. So and you're exempt from it if you are subject to the laws of another regulator. So the CDFIs, if they're subject to the laws of DFS, the regulations of DFS, they would be covered. But every business now is on the hook for this. So it's this is cultural at this point. And Victoria is absolutely correct. From your mission statement down to your board, down to your C-suite, into the managerial level and boots on the ground. And you have to begin with that risk assessment and that data assessment. What are you storing? How long do you store it for? And what do you do with it when it's finished? The data retention. And again, you're going to go through and you're going to identify and document your assets and vulnerabilities. You're going to, during the course of the risk assessment, and as Edison spoke about, what are the potential business aspects and likelihoods? And when do I have to go to my insurance company? If you go to your insurance company and they ask you what you did to prepare for this, and the answer is not much, there may be an issue. So you want to have, I don't want to call it papering the file because that's not what it is, but you want to have everything that you have done to comply with this regulation ready to hand off to someone to say, I was ready and it still happened. And
Great.
Here's what I do when it happens. That's very important.
Great. So I'm going to just jump in for a minute too to build on this. So, I think like for those of us who are focused on sort of human-centered design and thinking about our customers, if you take the perspective of you as a consumer and think about how all of the different companies that you interact with, to me that helps sort of bring it through. So there's often, I'm more of a small business microfinance person, for organizations for CDFIs that are trying to go to scale, trying to go more online, where there's a lot of competition and there are a lot of bad actors out there. From a customer perspective, I want to know that my engagement with that entity with respect to my business information, my personal information, is safe and secure. So to me, it's, this also rolls up from where you interact with your customers all the way up to the board. So that's sort of me preaching, but that's, I think, a way for me to help understand it. If you put, and that's really, as somebody who used to work for DFS and had worked for regulations, this is all about consumer protection, at the end of the day, whether it's, that's really what it boils down to. So if you put that lens into it, it's helpful in terms of, how I talk to my board about things like this. But the other thing I want to mention before we get into sort of worst case scenarios and then other questions is that, it's been very interesting for me now at a community bank you know, when we talk about, for our organization, what are the biggest risks out there for our company and our shareholders and our profitability, whatever you want to slice it? Yeah, you think, oh, it's credit quality, right? Oh, it's the overall economy. I've never seen it not in the top 2 in terms of the overall risks for cybersecurity. So, you know, that's the bottom line for us. That's our shareholders, et cetera. So, you know, from our board, they've been trained that this is top 2 or 3. They got to know it and they got to understand it. It's got to trickle down to the individual. But I'm starting to ramble now. But why don't the panelists talk a little bit about what are worst case scenarios and what can happen and what the repercussions are that ultimately will have to be mitigated at some point. Anyone want to jump in?
I can
Edison,
certainly.
for a small community bank, how do you I mean, what does disaster look like for you guys? I know what it looks like for us.
Well, you know, it's definitely a loaded question. I think it goes back to the enterprise level question that we had as far as, you know, what do we need to do is that encryption. We need to know what data do we have and where is the data. So it all goes back to all the information we've been discussing and understanding our organizations. Once we have that, then we can put the controls around it, you know, and before it was the firewalls, you know, that's all we had to worry about. It wasn't so much about phishing. Now it's a whole different environment, and next year it's going to expand. There's going to be something new that we have to prepare for. So that's what I meant as far as continue to evolve as an organization, understanding our risk. And I think we're fortunate also that everybody in the organization at this point understands at some level what cybersecurity or information security is of your own private information. So taking, you know, that into consideration and ensuring that, you know, what are we doing at the top level? And then what do you do when you have a new employee? Do you sit down with that employee and let them know what the controls are in place and ensure that that employee feels comfortable letting you know that they click on a link that they shouldn't have or open an attachment that they don't recognize? It's really important that we understand. And right now for us, that's, you know, our weakest point, ourselves, you know, ensure, you know, recognize that all our information is on LinkedIn, hasn't been stolen. And we are being spearphishing, you know, the spearphishing. They go in and saying, hey, by the way, this is the chief lending officer. Here's the CEO. Here's the secretary of the CEO. How can I go ahead and target them? So understanding our risk from a personal level, understanding the risk from a corporate level down, and ensuring that everybody down to the employee that just started understands what we put in place and that they feel comfortable. I think a critical point now is making sure that all your employees feel comfortable to let you know if something happened. Because the sooner that happens, the sooner you can react and put all your, you know, all your plans, all your policies, everything you have in place to ensure that you prevent any, you know, future bleed or, you know, extended data leak of what could have happened, instead of staying 3 months quiet and all of a sudden all the flags will start going off and saying, you know, getting a screen says you need to pay X amount of Bitcoin in order to restore your data.
Excellent,
right?
Excellent. Victoria, how do you talk to your students about this? The sort of the worst case scenarios, and if you've got a breach and you've been compromised.
So for students and non-students, I think the worst case scenario depends on your organization, right? Anything that could lead to a loss in confidentiality, integrity, and availability of data, you probably have to address it. And the way to know what that is have frequent audits. For example, if you have security audits, you may be able to identify areas that you thought you were secure in. And so a lack of an attack does not necessarily mean that you are secure, right? So a lot of companies wait until something happens. But if you have any frequent audits, or if you have a threat analysis of your organization, if you have test emails for phishing attempts and see if if the training is really working, then you can identify weak areas within your organization. But this also change, right? So, you know, this month you may identify that the weakest area is, you know, maybe users are clicking on campaign phishing emails. Next month, it could be different. You know, it could be something different. But if you're frequent in conducting audits, in conducting using detective techniques to detect what's going on, you may be able to identify how that's changing.
Excellent. Deborah?
In a small organization, I think the first step that you should, after you do your risk assessment, you need to designate the cyber quarterback, and that would be your CISO. And it should be a senior level executive if you can. I know in a small organization, that's, going to be the person sitting next to you probably, but you definitely have to have someone who can develop and enforce your policies, who can do the monitoring with the compliance, make sure the auditing is getting done, preserves data privacy. So the important thing is that when the worst case scenario happens, that person is calling the shots, and they should be a problem solver who are good with people and have good project management skills. And when the breach occurs, you want to have in your policy, your team identified. Who is your cyber breach team? Counsel, marketing, HR, as I said before, who speaks for your organization? Because all this rolls up to reputational risk. If, I'm sure we all remember when Target was breached and it was a big, our credit card numbers are everywhere. So when that happens, it creates a reputational risk for the company. It's the same thing with your organization. So you want to have that quarterback who can sort of be responsible for moving your organization through an incident. And then most importantly, when the incident is over, through an examination of what went wrong, where the holes were, and how you can fix them.
And Deborah, sorry, let me expand on one thing that you just reminded me. I think it's really important. Why it's important to have somebody senior level or that has the power to bring something up. We're all faulty for this, but what if the CEO wants to have access to this website? What if the CEO wants to have this open or this change? We have to ensure that the same controls we put in for all the employees is for all the employees. And this falls on all of us on the senior management to ensure that that's in place. It's a balance between best business practice and cybersecurity. And unfortunately, cybersecurity is part of the world. Junk email, make sure that it's blocked, making sure that you don't open additional websites. So I understand sometimes you're going to have somebody, depending on the organization, how large they are, it's going to be a little more complex. Somebody comes in and says, I need this now. That person has to have the power to say no and be able to say, here's how we have in place and the reason why we put this in place. We don't allow zip files to come in through our emails. And we have customers, and unfortunately that interferes with some of our customer interface, but it's a decision that we made as an organization, and we have the board, senior management support, and yes, it causes conflict and issues with customers sometimes, but we understand what there is. So I think it's critical to make sure that that person can take, be able to say to the board, no, I'm not going to provide this email address to somebody that is outside of the organization, or that they're going to go ahead and whitelist something that is not supposed to be whitelisted. So I think Deborah had something really critical. I think that we should all learn. Same controls go for everybody in the organization. It doesn't matter if you're the person taking the customer information downstairs or you're running the organization.
Excellent. That's a great point. So we're going to open it up to some Q&A. I would encourage people to type in the chat their questions. I'm going to start as a moderator. I'm putting myself in the shoes of my nonprofit days. So yeah, I get it. I see the risk. I'm on a shoestring. Can't I just hire a vendor that's going to deal with this for me? What's your advice for, everybody's constrained in their resources, for how and who engages a vendor and what can go wrong and what can go right?
I can start with this one. One of the ways is to do a cost-benefit analysis. So how much is it going to cost you to have in-house trained people doing what the vendors, the outsiders would do? And would it be beneficial? So if it's going to cost more than it's beneficial, then you will find out relatively quickly before you even bring them on, if you do a cost benefit analysis.
In addition to that, I would say, use your peers. Look at organizations. FS-ISAC is an organization that I believe all CDFIs can join. And I constantly see it there. I'm at X organization, I'm trying to do this. What do you guys recommend? They have a library of data or information that you can use. But if you don't have those resources now, go to your peers, who you're using now, and then make sure that you continue that monitoring. It doesn't have to wait. You don't have to wait a year to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to. Continue to communicate. I use X company. What are they doing? Are they doing good? Are they able to provide the security? Are they doing this, the internal vulnerability assessments, the external vulnerability assessment, penetration testing? Do you need a third party? And again, if you're a small organization, you're not going to go ahead and say, I need to go ahead and expend all this amount of money for that. I'm going to go to the cloud. I'm going to make sure the controls within the cloud. We talk, most of us are using Office 365. Even if it is, okay, I need to put something in the budget to ensure that all the controls are in place for that service. And then as you continue to grow, just, I would say definitely talk to your peers, reach out to, I'm sure any of us, if you have any questions, we'll be more than happy to hopefully provide some guidance.
Excellent. So a couple of questions come in, and hello, Kim. Nice to see you virtually. I'd love this question to be answered to my CEO. Have you guys seen an uptick in incidents as we've all worked towards moving from home? Do you have a perspective on that?
From a research point of view, we've actually seen an increase in incidents and users falling prey to, phishing attacks and any of those attacks because they're working from home. And everyone is going through emotional stress that some of that training that they had way back when probably is over their head right now, but we've certainly seen an increase in threats and an increase in actual incidents.
Debra, Edison, comments on that?
I'm not aware of that.
It hasn't stopped. I would say it just hasn't stopped at all. The organizations that are targeted are usually the organizations that don't have all the controls in place, law firms and every other organization that will fall and say, you know what, I don't have a dedicated information person, or I don't have to fall under any guidance. So that's why I think the New York DFS, as painful as it is, and I'll be the first one to admit when it came out, I was like, luckily we're a bank, so we already had pretty much everything in place. So I was fortunate enough to say, okay, how do we use this to mature our cybersecurity posture? For a small organization, hey, okay, put this in place. Make sure you're not the low-hanging fruit.
Excellent, excellent.
Well, actually, I have a question from email that's kind of related to this topic.
Cool.
Is there a skill shortage? Victoria, is your department booming? And, when it comes to in-house versus outsourced, is there a good pipeline for people getting into this field?
Yes, there is a good pipeline because a lot of the colleges are recognizing the need for cybersecurity experts, because at the college, I don't think there's any organization that doesn't need cybersecurity experts. And so I do agree that the skill gap is still there. There's a lot of jobs, but there's a lot of people who believe that they have the knowledge and skills, but to find a skilled cybersecurity professional is still quite difficult. But hopefully in the upcoming years, this is a skill gap that is going to be closed, because for most of our students, I can speak from the previous years, they all get placed by the time they graduate. Most of them get internships before they graduate, which speaks to the lack of shortage of professionals in the field.
Right, excellent. So I think we have time for one more question. Is there a template for a cybersecurity manual that folks can recommend? Or Colleen, I don't know, is there a way, in a non-proprietary way that we can share sort of best practices for the manual side? I know for some entities that's, a check the box item, but as we've heard from the last 57 minutes, it's a lot. It should and must be more than a check the box item.
So there are some resources that NIST has that can be incorporated into training. There is also the Department of Homeland Security usually has publications of guidelines that can be incorporated into a cybersecurity program, be it training or other ways such as technical controls, administrative controls, procedure, and so on and so forth. So I don't think there is like a standalone template, but there's different resources that you can use to put together a really strong portfolio for training your employees.
Great, great. And there were two more questions that came in through the Q&A channel. I'll try and frame them in one. Are there PowerPoint slides that we could, for training slides for employees that we could potentially share, and also just recommendations for augmenting extra training in-house around cybersecurity?
I can tell you that I have done all of that. I have created a cybersecurity packet, but I want to go back to what Dan said about the outsourcing. I have to stress to you, you can outsource to a third-party provider, but I have sat on in a company with regulator, with a federal regulator. You own your vendor management. So if you think you're going to set it and forget it, you can forget that. You're responsible for the behavior. You're responsible for auditing it on one side. The other attendant to that is you can't also set and forget your policies. I have helped CDFIs walk through institutionalizing the cybersecurity regulation. Every CDFI is different. Some outsource, some don't. What's the nexus with your outsourced provider? What do they owe you? Who's doing the penetration testing? How is it happening? So I really want to caution against the template approach, because unless you're going to have somebody sit down and go through that template and make sure it applies to your organization, I think you're walking into a landmine.
Great, that's very, very, very well said. And if anyone wants to look at what recent bank fines have been, you'll see that many, I would say, more than a third of bank fines have related to vendor items that we think about as vendor risk, because we're on the hook for all that stuff. You sign those contracts, etc. So we're really at time. So Colleen, before I turn it back over to you, I have a deck that my ISO has used that I'm happy to share, Colleen, that might be helpful.
That would be great. And if anyone has
any other resources, it has at least the links to the DFS Part 500 and the other item, the SHIELD Act that's in there.
Yeah.
I guess if there are other things that we want to get out to people, maybe on the manual, I'm happy to send you that deck. But is there anything else, Colleen, as we move on?
Not that I can think of, but anyone who wants to send any resources, any links to me, I will then get them out to the CDFI Coalition. So we are running up against a deadline. So I did want to thank everyone very much for being part of our CDFI Friday series today, especially our moderator, Dan, and our panelists, Edison, Debra, and Victoria. Thanks so very much for your time and your expertise. This is really a terrific panel. You covered a lot of ground, and it's such an important topic. I do hope that you will be able to join one or more of our upcoming events, including creating community wealth through community-controlled investment. Can't tell you how many times I had to practice saying that because it's a mouthful.
And you said it beautifully, Colleen.
Thank you very much. You can find the full list of events and sponsors on the CDFI Coalition website at nyscdfi.org. Thank you all very much for your participation. Stay safe and be well.
Thanks, everyone. Be well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.